Welcome to this episode of Harvey County Talk. As always, I am your host, Lance Gormley. Our guest on the program is Rod Martinez, who is a native Kansan and Newtonian who graduated from Newton High School in 1964, and right now he's living in La Punta, California. How are you doing today, Rod?
Hey, Lance, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of met in some precarious ways on social media. So for those that don't think that you can meet friends over social media, Rod and I became friends over social media. There was a post that we put out. There was a Harvey County citizen who was visiting California and happened to catch a SpaceX rocket flying through the air. And Rod also was watching the same rocket at the same time and started to comment on the thread. And then we started sending each other some messages back and forth. And he discovered Harvey County Talk like that. We started talking about Mexican-American baseball, of all things. And it turns out that he's a co-author of a book called The Mexican-American Baseball in Kansas City. And I just found that completely intriguing, to say the least. And we just hit it off real good. And we talked about Newton and Harvey County, and he filled me in on his time here and his life and family that lived here and then how he just made his way to California upon retirement. So anyway, I invited Rod on the program to talk about the book, Mexican-American Baseball in Kansas City, and him being a co-author of that. I had, if you remember watching the program before, I had Mr. Jaso on for the 75th anniversary of the Newton Mexican-American baseball tournament, fast pitch baseball tournament. And so I'm highly intrigued by the history of Newton and the role that Mexican Americans played in the culture and history of Newton. And I've said it very oftentimes before on the program that, honestly, the Mexican American community is a strong part, if not the backbone of our community, and how much they've contributed through culture and just time and helping build all the things that we have here in Newton. So, like I said, I asked for Rod to come on the program and talk to me about the book and talk to me about his life here in Newton. And so I guess without further ado, Rod, tell the audience a little bit about your history of were you born in Newton?
No, I was actually born in Liberal, Kansas, December 1946. Then as a small boy, we moved to Copeland, Kansas, out there in the Southwest. My father and grandfather were Santa Fe Railroad track foremen. My father was a World War II veteran. And after the war, he worked for his grandfather in Santa Fe and Copeland. And then we moved to Dodge City. While I was a grade schooler in junior high, then he changed his job from the Santa Fe Railroad to the United States Railway Postal Mail Service. So we had to move to Newton, and our parents bought a home there on 700 East 8th Street, near the tracks, south side of the tracks, if you will. And so I finished my junior high and high school and graduated in '64. Three months later, at the age of 17, I volunteered for the United States Navy. My father had to sign for me to go in at a young age. And I spent 3 years in the Navy out of San Diego on an attack aircraft carrier, the USS Bonhomme Richard. And I stayed in California. And so my actual job career was in the aerospace field at the time when there was the rockets, the NASA, the man to the moon. I worked at a small independent materials testing laboratory in the quality control department, and my whole career for 35, 40 years was a quality control, both in the testing laboratory and also a metals foundry. Some of our clients happen to be Cessna, Spirit Aerospace there in Wichita as well. So I've always had a connection back home some way or another. There's always a connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we were talking too, even yesterday in preparation for the interview, and we were just, you mentioned that you had family here, so you would come back here regularly, even though you were living someplace else, and just always got to be here to watch Newton evolve and change and grow over time. And I got to ask, what possessed you to are you just a baseball fan? Are you just an avid baseball fan, or how did you get involved in the whole deal?
Well, here's the deal. In 2012, I had some information about my father's baseball life, but I didn't research it until an article here in Los Angeles. I saw an article in the LA Times about a group called the Latino Baseball History Project. And they were seeking photographs, historical photographs and stories of the Mexican-American baseball player in the United States. So I answered this article, and I met Dr. Richard Santillan, and I shared my pictures of my dad's World War II baseball photographs and his semi-professional photographs and newspaper clippings from 1940. I shared those with the professor, and it developed into a book, as you mentioned, Mexican-American Baseball in Kansas City. And as you know, there's Mr. Gene Chavez from Kansas City, myself, Mr. Raymond Elias in Newton, Ben Chappelle that was a teacher at Kansas University. And so we came together and shared all these pictures, but the pictures were from Garden City to Kansas City, from Salina to Wichita, Dodge City, Garden City, all these large areas where the Mexican-American community settled as a result generally of the railroad workers that came into the United States back in the 1920s. And so we put this book together, my first introduction to doing anything like this. It was fun. And so I started researching my father's background of how he was at age of 17 in Copeland. Copeland was probably 350 people population. But he and his brother, my uncle Jesus, were considered outstanding baseball players in high school, and they joined a brand new team, the Liberal Kansas Black Sox, part of the Western Division of the Ben Johnson League. And those teams included Garden City, Dodge City, Pratt, and Larned. They started to play with Liberal. And unfortunately, that team only lasted a couple of years. But in that 2 years, there happened to be a scout by the name of Bert Wells, B-E-R-T Wells, W-E-L-L-S. He was a scout with the Cardinals and then went to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1939. Larned happened to be one of the teams in my dad's league. The scout is from Larned, Kansas. He saw my dad play, and he offered him a contract of $90 a month to sign with the Brooklyn organization, but my dad declined it. The reason is because the people in those communities, Dodge, Garden, they're the ones that paid the salaries of the players. It wasn't the team; it was the people. And he was making more money playing for Liberal than what the Dodgers wanted to give him. And money was important back in 1939, 1940, just before the war. Yeah. Okay, so I tell you, Rod, you gave me something that's amazing. I get to open up the front cover of this book, and Rod sent me a copy of this book, and he signed it. And, he even put a nice message in there for me. And so, of course, I began reading the book. It's fascinating to me, the amount of history. Now, I'm a history guy, right? That is in this book. And I just thought to myself, wow, I didn't even know when I had the interview with Mr. Jaso that, kind of how this even evolved yet, because this didn't just start out as a fast pitch. This started out, as a fast pitch softball league. Is that correct? That is correct. Yes. The situation that grew, fast pitch softball grew out of, unfortunately, segregation and racism that was encountered by the veterans, the Mexican-American boys in the United States, not just Kansas, but the United States, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, that ran up against issues that prevented the boys from playing baseball with the Anglo counterparts, and were denied playing on city-owned fields. That happened in Emporia. That happened in Garden City and Dodge City. And so fast pitch softball became the alternate game that the boys picked up. Eventually, the Mexican-American boys did play against Anglo teams. I have newspaper clippings to show that, especially from Garden City. So fast pitch softball evolved around that because that was the alternative to baseball. Huh. And basically that's how it began. Yeah.
So, I found this highly interesting too when I was talking to the other guest, is that, it was mentioned even when we had our conversation that it wasn't just that there was segregation from Mexican Americans playing with whites or Anglos, but also that they were, like you said, they weren't even allowed to play on the fields. So when we're talking about this situation of, you're just the individuals were just pretty much banned. I mean, from even playing the sport unless they were to play with each other and then play in their own league. And in some cases, in all cases, had to create their own fields, right? I mean, so
that is correct.
Yeah, tell me a little about that.
Well, Newton is very famous. I'm not an expert, but I lived there long enough and participated in. And Newton, Our Lady Guadalupe, Holy Name Field, the field still sits there abandoned behind the church. And the two outstanding dugouts are still there. The concrete dugouts are still there. It's like a shrine, if you will. And on that field played some of the most famous Newton Mexican American ball players, the Arellanos, Gonzalez, Reyes, Gomez, and so on and so forth, that played on the field, and it brought in teams from out of state. It was one of the most iconic events in Newton back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s until the church decided that they were going to end it. And it was a time when the people spent a weekend to come together, share their love for each other, have a beer, sit down and talk, young boys, young girls meeting, going to the church, having Mexican food. The Ladies' Altar Society got together and prepared the food down in the church basement. And the walk from the field to the church was just a few yards. So it was a coming together of that community. And the Anglo people also came and participated in our food.
Yeah.
It was not unlike for them to come and enjoy our food for the weekend. So it was a coming together of the community to just say, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. And then everybody went home feeling good. It was a good time to have during the July 4th tournaments.
Yeah. And see, to me, that's amazing. And I find it very interesting not living in a time in which, segregation was as visible as it was back then. Right? I don't remember that. I wasn't even alive for that to take place, fortunately. But, you had mentioned in our phone conversations and just also here for in preparation for what was written in the book. But, just to take people back to this time in which we had Mexican American men that had migrated here and then went and fought in World War I and World War II, but yet at the same time came home and were still considered a second-class citizen and were not allowed to participate in a lot of the same functions and activities. And I mean, not to rest here, but one thing that's just amazing to me is that when somebody tells you you can't play on this field, or no, you can't do this, or you need not apply, that the fortitude of the Mexican American men and women who just decided, well, we're not going to not play. We're just going to create our own league with our own people, and we're going to make our own ball field. We're going to have these tournaments and whatnot. And you had mentioned that, yeah, there was some whites or Anglos that shared in that as well. But can you just kind of give me a grasp of the time in which this happened? Kind of what life might have been like for somebody that was living in that time?
Well, of course, I can only speak for me and my family, and my situation, my family situation is not unlike other families in Newton that may have experienced the same situations. A lot of the veterans were not allowed to join the veterans clubs, and clear into the 1960s when the African Americans were having their difficulties in the South. We also encountered that situation in the early 60s when we moved to Newton. Not being able to eat downtown, being watched as you went into a store. My father, a World War II veteran from the United States Army Air Corps, stationed in England, he was not allowed to join the VFW. But how we handled it was not through physical means, was not through yelling and screaming. We handled it by saying, we need to get an education, we need to go to school, we can always go a different route to handle this, to make ourselves better. My father, a veteran, was denied entry into a club. And so what he did is he sat down and he wrote a letter to the commandant of this veterans club. And he didn't demand, he asked why he wasn't allowed to join the club. Well, the commandant got a hold of the local club and said, you cannot deny this man, because our rules and regulations, our motto is everyone is welcome and you can't discriminate. So that's how my father handled it. Our people handled it that way. We went to school, junior college, got diplomas, teachers working in the government, so on and so forth. That's how we handled some of those situations.
And see, back to baseball. To me,
sure.
when I think of history and I read history and think about a time in which that was commonplace, it's just very disheartening. And I think about how far we've come since then. And of course, as a society, we have so much farther to go when it comes to people being unified and coming together, because we're all the children of God. I mean, honestly, regardless of race, creed, color, it doesn't really matter. But what birthed out of this is still running today. I mean, I think they're getting ready to have the 76th year anniversary of the Mexican American fast pitch. So taking me back. So it started as a fast pitch softball, and then now it's almost as though the another thing that's interesting to me is that it evolved into fast pitch baseball. And it's not very often that you get to go and see, I don't know of many that are around that are just a volunteer league, summer league of individuals who get together, grown men, right, to play this baseball. So do you just the history on this, do you know about why or when it changed over from going to fast pitch softball to actual just overhand, high action, intense baseball?
Well, baseball obviously was the sport of the country. And like I had mentioned before, certain segments of our society, Mexican Americans, were forced into the softball, especially in Kansas. And softball happens to be a very popular sport in Texas. Many softball clubs are down there. It's not that they don't play baseball. Their children play baseball. It's just that it's a tradition that's been handed down for years to play fast-pitch softball that evolved back after the war. And again, I'm not an expert. My expertise comes in just participating in watching and reading, researching. And that's where we're at now. One of the things that this book came about, Mexican American Baseball, the Latino Baseball History Project, was because of a comment that was made. Dr. Richard Santillan is the lead author. He's been the lead author in all the series of 18 books that have been published. And we've had countless contributors to these books. I'm just one of many that contributed photographs and stories from our people. We take no credit for this. People who contributed to the books receive full acknowledgement. It's not I that did this, it was them. Just ordinary citizens. So baseball was a question. How many Mexican American boys played baseball? This was a question that came up at California State University, Los Angeles. And some of the Mexican American professors were asking themselves this, and that's how it evolved. It just started gaining traction. And all of a sudden, they started receiving tons of pictures and stories from the Los Angeles area. And it's evolved into the project that we see now of 18 publications, Texas, Kansas, and California, of just these fantastic stories. Men, women, church teams, railroad teams, pickup teams, photographs of young girls, softball teams that were wearing satin uniforms. So it's just fantastic photographs. Our grandmothers played ball, back in the 40s and 50s. And this history is just sitting around in boxes somewhere. And this is what we look for. We are nonprofits, so what we do is our way of contacting this, just like phone, email. That's how we contact people, and we invite people to share their stories. And 18 books have been developed because of our contacts.
See, that's incredible. See, I didn't even know that before we had this conversation, was that this is not just one, this is one of many. And from what we talked about too, there's more coming. That's right?
That's right. We have here in California, we've got 2 books. Of course, California is a very populous state, so obviously you got more baseball, more softball, men, women, and veterans. But we've got 4 books that we did on the Texas area. And we're going to do our second book called Mexican American Baseball in Kansas. And it's going to include not only the photographs that we currently have, but we are enlisting more people to come in. And Amazon is now our publisher, unlike Arcadia on the first 16 books, but Amazon now, they allow us to do a lot more thinking outside of the box. Our photographs include uniforms, newspaper clippings, brochures, as well as team photos, maybe a picture of a baseball player with his mother and father, how that story built up. There's a lot of angles you can take about the history of a person that played the game, whether it's baseball or softball.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I love this book. Okay. And it's because I do love the fact that there's photographs in there and there's clippings and all of these things. And like I said, I'm a history person, but, it's just very interesting because my thoughts go to, who was the person that's wearing that uniform? What was their life like? And they had dreams and aspirations and hopes and families and grandchildren and great grandchildren at this point in time. And it just, once again, I just kept coming back to the fact that, I've never seen a story told like this about something so unique. And, Newton, we're all familiar with the Mexican American fast pitch baseball, but like, I didn't know any of this stuff before. And I didn't know there was a place that I could go and get this information. And, now you're telling me there's 17 other books that I need to look at, and then one on its way. But I'm just, there's even places in this book that do tell the story of these people, and there's names in here in chapter 4. Specifically, it's talks about the Newton softball tournament. And when you read through it, it just, it basically explains what you have, but in a little greater detail. And it's just, there's names in here that I recognize. There's names in here of, I'm guessing, well, that must be so-and-so's grandpa. I mean, Ramundo Jaso, if I'm saying that right, Martin Salceda.
Yes, the Jaso family.
Yeah, I mean, I had one of the guys on there. So when he was talking about his grandfather, it's very possible that, well, that person's in one of these pictures here. And it's just amazing to think that there's such a rich history, not only here in Newton, but along like many rail towns like you talked about. And that just speaks to immigration. I mean, you told me a story about like your great grandfather. I don't know, I don't know how far back it goes, but that he came from Mexico. He immigrated through Mexico up into the United States, and then through all of those things that you had talked about early on, just found themselves in Newton of all places. And I wonder how many stories are like that, not only in these books, but just that some people can tell person to person without even needing a history book, but just family tradition passing that down.
Well, the history shows that the migration back in the 1900s from Mexico to the United States was partly due to the Mexican Revolution. Home ownership was not allowed. Land was taken. So, and thousands and thousands of men came through Texas and began working on the railroads, primarily the Santa Fe Railroad, and they were sent to other cities where workers were needed. Most of the workers that came across and for the railroad actually maintained the track system. The Santa Fe Railroad was a growing railroad system. They needed workers in the roundhouses. They needed track gangs to maintain the tracks. All the cities from Kansas City, Topeka, Emporia, Newton, Dodge City, Garden City, that was the route of the famous Santa Fe Railroad. They needed, plus wheat, the primary product of Kansas wheat. How many hundreds and hundreds of miles of branch lines that went out to from Hutchinson out north or Hutchinson south? They needed those tracks to be maintained to move the grain. Yeah. And so they needed workers, and this is why a lot of these men came. What happened was that the workers would come and work, and then they would leave and go back to Mexico. Well, the railroad said, look, we need to replace these workers while they're gone on vacation. So what they did was, let's invite the entire families to come. That way the workers would stay in the United States instead of going back to Mexico. So they invited the workers to bring their families and live in little towns like Copeland, Ensign, Ingalls, Cimarron, little towns like that where they needed the workers. They housed these families to keep them there. Yeah. And so it evolved into these cities developing like Emporia, Dodge City, and Newton, a large Mexican-American community like you see today as a result of the workers from Mexico from the 1900s coming in. It's a tremendous story.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's told through the lens of baseball. In this book, it's like baseball is what we're talking about, and that's the softball, and then we're really coming down to telling the story of the Mexican American immigration and who these people were, and this it's just and I had a question, and this is maybe an ignorant question or whatever, but I mean, is part of the reason why these books are being written is because there was nobody there before to tell the story of these people?
That's correct, because what you see in these books that we are publishing, and remember, we are a non-profit. Every nickel and dime that we spend is out of our pockets. I will be flying in August to Emporia to attend the 4th annual Latin Legends softball tournament, which will occur after the Newton's 76th famous fast pitch tournament. And I will be going back there as a representative of our project. And we are always looking for photographs and stories of individuals. You don't have to be famous, but every picture you see of a person has a story. Every picture has a story.
Yeah.
And taking that story, getting it out of the individual is what we like. It's tremendous things that we find out. And so all these photographs contributed by different people. Ray Elias did the Newton chapter. I did the Sunflower chapter. Dr. Santillan is the lead author. He overrode the situation. Dr. Gene Chavez took care of the Kansas City area. So we've got a lot of people contributing. These photographs of individuals have a story, and it's not known to anybody else but to us.
Yes,
that's all.
Yeah. But then this book allows it to go to the rest of the world for people like me to see and enjoy, and to be able to learn something from that. So has your response through this just been overwhelming? I mean, when people, when you go to talk to individuals about it during these tournaments, are people just like, wow, that's super cool, and I have all this stuff that I want to be a part of it too, and allow my story to be told?
Well, here's the situation. Like I mentioned, we're a nonprofit, so our way of communicating is by the simple methods of telephone, email, Facebook, just one-on-one conversation. And then they tell another person, that person tells another person, and they may or may not want to grab onto what we're doing, and that's okay. But there is a lot of this history out there of individual families, individuals who played just weekend baseball or weekend softball, and they've got photographs. It could be their grandfather, it could be their father, uncle, cousins, anybody, and these pictures are just laying around. So we are amazed at some of the things that we see that's only known to the community. It's not known outside of our communities. And we share that within our Mexican-American communities throughout the United States, Chicago, Nebraska. We got photographs from Nebraska, Chicago, Texas, Colorado, Arizona. I've made contacts with people in Arizona with fast-pitch softball that Mexican-American boys played, along with the professional baseball players that I've made contact with. So the story's there, it just doesn't get out.
Yeah.
It's not interesting enough for certain segments of our society, but it's interesting to the Mexican-American community, like, oh, well, we didn't know that, or wow, that's great. Yeah. So how long this is going to go on, I don't know, but this is, we're amazed every day that we find these pictures and stories, and we publish them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's how we do it. Sure.
Okay, and I want to ask a general question of you. And I know this is Whopper, but what's one of the most amazing things that you personally feel that you have stumbled upon throughout all of this?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the Smithsonian, prior to the pandemic, the Smithsonian wanted us to have, the Smithsonian Institution wanted us to have a traveling museum across the United States with a complete display of these photographs. And we were to travel to our Mexican-American communities all the way from California to Washington, D.C., and stop and show this, and have meetings, and let people know that this history is there. Well, the pandemic put a kibosh on that, and it's just never gained strength again. But the Smithsonian actually sent people to a big conference at California State University, San Bernardino, encouraging us to do this, encouraging us to continue these books. In fact, our books reside in the Smithsonian as well as Cooperstown. And but so we continue. The stories, the individual stories are just, it's amazing. And I'm going to give you a little small fact. There was a young lady, her first name was Lupita, and she was from Orange County, California. And we do have a book called Mexican-American Baseball in Orange County. And we got tons of pictures out of nowhere. this young lady, Lupita, if you recall the famous duo called the Righteous Brothers, you ever heard of the Righteous Brothers?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yeah. You're
The
dating
taller
me.
boy, the tall boy that was in that group, I think it was Bill. Come to find out, and by the way, what I'm saying is not unknown. It's on actual Wikipedia, and he talks about this. The Righteous Brother was actually dating a Mexican-American girl in high school, and her name was Lupita. Okay? Mm-hmm. The song that they produced called Little Latin Loopy Lou, he wrote that song because of her. That song actually played on the top 10 by the Righteous Brothers. And so when we found this, we were floored. We were actually floored that this little bit of history between an Anglo boy and a Mexican girl, and how that developed into a song that was played on national radio.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's just another thing. That's another nugget that just of a story that should be told, that people get to hear. And for me, I'd say that's a feel-good story, especially given the time and place in which it happened, you know?
Yes, right.
I mean, just amazing. We are coming to the end of the program, but one thing that I do always give my guest is the last word to speak directly to the hearts and minds of anybody listening. But before I give you that, I'd just like to tell people this book, Mexican-American Baseball in Kansas City, it's images of baseball. And of course, at the beginning, if you go back to the beginning, I'm not going to butcher anybody's names, but it's a very good book. And I'm almost completed with it. It's not a hard read. There's a lot of just valuable nuggets in there of a time in which has long been past, but capturing history and the pictures and the clips and everything that you have, and just me finding out that this is one of many just inspires me to go and find more. It really does. Yes. When you're giving the last word, or before you give the last word, is there any way you could tell people how they can access this book and be able to buy this book for themselves?
Sure. The publisher of this book is called Arcadia. Okay, Arcadia Publishing Company. And if you Google Arcadia Publishing Company / Mexican American Baseball, it will show you the 16 books that have been published. Okay? And this book is one of those 16s. There's a lot of California, there's Texas, and one book, the Kansas City book. Amazon is our new publisher, but these are California books. And my last word is, my father, a young Mexican-American boy from Copeland, Kansas, played baseball. He was given a contract, or offered a contract by the Brooklyn Dodgers. He went into World War II. He tried to become a fighter pilot. He ended up in England, Wattisham, England, and he organized a baseball team in 1944 and 45, and that baseball team beat every other other group of fighter groups in England, and they won the championship in 1945. And as a prize, they got to go to Edinburgh, Scotland for a week. So my father's baseball is how I got into the research, but not only of my father, but other Mexican-American men, women, and veterans who have a story, and we need to see that. It's just, there's no cost. It's a matter of talking and writing. That's the cost.
To capture history forever for the rest of us to read and see. It's amazing. Right. All right, Rod. Yeah. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate you coming on the program and telling your story, and I hope to bring some awareness to what an awesome thing we do have of history here in Newton, of the Mexican-American community. And then not only that, but that stems all across the state of Kansas and to other states. And it really just, I take it back to the fact that it's telling a historical account through the lens of baseball. And I think it's so creative, and it allows for people to really, view the pictures, read the stories, and it comes to life. It comes to life, and it says so much that it doesn't say. I got to say that there's so much there
Yes.
that tells a
Yes.
story that's not in words or in pictures. It's just for the reader to understand. And
Right.
I got to say, go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, and Newton, of all cities, has a tremendous history, and that history needs to be kept told and told day in and day out, because that's a vibrant part of the Newton community is the Mexican American people, and they should continue doing that. And I encourage them, and I'm happy to help Newton be told outside of Kansas.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm hoping that we will in the future do a better job of telling that story.
Okay. That's
Okay,
good.
Rod.
Thank you.
You're the man.
Right.
I appreciate your friendship.
Thanks a lot.
And
I appreciate it.
Okay. We'll talk to you sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Lance.
Right.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Harvey County Talks, folks. I was your host, Lance Gormley, and our guest on the program today was Rod Martinez.